Hello, my name is Michael Goodson and my paper is called The Digital Divide, a Literature Review. As our technology becomes more advanced and available, we have come to rely heavily on it. My literature review sets out to discuss the various literature and academic settings in order to define the digital divide, discuss the factors that contribute to the digital divide, and to discover if a digital divide exists between regions such as rural, urban, and suburban settings. I will now discuss my findings with you in this PowerPoint. I will now start with the purpose and objectives of my paper, The Digital Divide, a Literature Review. This topic is of personal interest to me. As a secondary education teacher, I have observed the impacts of technology in urban, suburban, and rural education settings. When I begin a career in instructional technology, I believe that one of the most important challenges that I face will be to address stereotypes, misconceptions, and solutions regarding technology. Researching the digital divide will prepare me to address topics regarding gaps in the digital divide. My research questions or objectives are stated. Question 1. What factors contribute to the haves and have-nots in relation to the digital divide in schools? And question 2. Is there a digital divide between urban, suburban, and rural areas? Alright, for my methods and my search, I used the James Madison Library page. I only used full-text peer-reviewed journal articles, and I thought it would be important to use information from the last 10 years because of the rapidly changing technology. The phrases digital divide causes and digital divide effects were used for question number 1, and for question number 2, the phrases digital divide urban and digital divide rural were used. When needed, I limited both searches by using United States in the search. I used various databases that you can see listed below. Eligibility was also important. Articles selected must have met the following criteria: peer-reviewed journal articles, relating or relatable to education in the United States. They had to be in English, they had to have an abstract, and they had to be available for download in full text. So each article was summarized and the definition of digital divide was identified in each article as it is related to each piece of literature. So the results are as followed. 13 articles were selected for review. For the first research question, the factors that contributed to the haves and have-nots of the digital divide, 8 articles were reviewed. For the second research question, is there a digital divide between urban and suburban and rural areas, 5 articles were reviewed. Okay, so here are my findings. Based on how a researcher framed or defined the digital divide was critical. Traditionally, there are 2 layers of the digital divide. Layer 1 refers to accessibility, which is the haves and the have-nots. Layer 2 refers to skills, the cans and the cannots. For my project, I created 4 categories to organize how each researcher approached the digital divide. Category 1 is also known as Layer 1. It's the digital divide in terms of access. Category 2 is in terms of skills. That's also called Layer 2. Category 3 is teacher implementation, or their ability or willingness to incorporate technology in schools. And Category 4 is cultural perception, or how we view technology. Each piece of literature, based on how it's framed, is placed into one or more category. Well, to summarize, defining the digital divide is very important. It's instrumental in determining whether one exists. If you define it one way, it may not exist. If you define it another way, you might find a digital divide. So the definition is complex and evolves as technology evolves. So what factors contribute to the digital divide and the haves and the have-nots? Well, in terms of access, the digital divide is closing, as evidenced by some of the studies. There is a digital divide in terms of skill set, implementation, and culture. Socioeconomic status is also a major determinant of whether there is a divide in schools. Also, it is found that one digital divide can lead to another digital divide. For example, if access is low, teachers and students can have a negative view of technology, which can affect skill set. Changing culture and implementation can lead to closing the digital divide in skill set. So is there a digital divide between urban, suburban, and rural areas? There is evidence of a digital divide between urban, suburban, and rural areas depending on how you define it, just like before. Well, culture and implementation are major factors in the digital divide between schools and their locations. Urban and rural areas are mostly on par with one another with some differences, but they fall behind suburban areas, and a lot of that links back to socioeconomics. So what's the relevance? Well, the findings in this literature can be significant in terms of teacher training and implementation. Through education, teachers and students' culture and perceptions can change to help close the gaps in the digital divide. So what are the implications? Well, public and private organizations can work to encourage appropriate use of technology in schools, which would help also close gaps in digital divide. Schools can work to train teachers on how to implement appropriate technology lessons to bridge any gaps in the digital divide. What are the limitations? Well, the first limitations, which are mentioned earlier in the paper, were that I stuck with one search website, which was the James Madison University database. I'm sure there's a lot more literature out there, so that's one limitation. The other limitation exists within the research of the papers themselves, which is that they focus generally on one particular state or region. And regions and states can differ so much, and it's really impractical or impossible to apply any findings in one region to the entirety of the United States because of significant cultural differences and geographic differences. Well, to summarize and in conclusion, the digital divide is a complicated topic, and how you define it determines whether one exists. The digital divide does exist. The gap in access is closing, but there's still a gap in skill set based on socioeconomics, regional differences, and cultural differences. One aspect of the digital divide can also greatly influence another. The literature suggests that teachers and school systems are on the front lines and would have the most impact on closing the digital divide. Well, I learned a lot about the digital divide. Thank you for watching and listening, and I look forward to reading your comments below.